you have to commercialize. I mean, if you actually want to translate your research or your brilliant ideas into patient care, you have to commercialize it. Thinking that commercialization is some sort of evil taboo thing is ivory tower academic thinking that doesn't actually result in real world solutions that are tangible.
Welcome, everybody, to the next episode of The Business of Better with Dr. John Chuback. And today I have a very esteemed guest, Dr. Paul Fedak, coming to us from Canada. And Dr. Fedak is a cardiovascular surgeon like myself. And we came to know each other, I believe, through LinkedIn, but that's a while back now. And Paul has a very esteemed and I think very interesting career. So with that, Paul, Dr. Fedak, welcome to the program.
Thank you, John. Thank you for inviting me, and happy Canada Day to all the Canadians who may be watching.
Oh, wonderful. Just before the 4th of July here in the United States. So we all have lots to be thankful for and lots to celebrate. Paul, why don't you start with a few sentences just telling our audience, our viewers, a little bit about yourself, your background, your training, et cetera.
Sure, absolutely. So, as you pointed out, I am a cardiac surgeon. I went to medical school in Toronto, so at the University of Toronto. Did my undergrad degree there, born and raised just outside of Toronto. And in medical school, I had the opportunity to be placed on rotation at the Toronto General Hospital. And as you may or may not know, it's a real hub for cardiac surgery. Some really colorful and legendary cardiac surgeons worked there at the time and still do. And it wasn't long before I gravitated towards cardiac surgery as a career, particularly after seeing it for the first time. I was absolutely mesmerized and just thought, wow, this is amazing. These are amazing people, this team effort, this amazing technical challenge, and watching patients go through the process of having cardiac surgery and seeing what they were like before and then seeing how much better they were after. I just thought, this is absolute magic and I need to be able to do this. So I set my sails towards a career in cardiac surgery. And of course, as you very well know, it's not the easiest thing to get the opportunity to do. I think everybody knows Shumway's old line that, the toughest thing about cardiac surgery is getting the opportunity to do it. But I actually did get the opportunity, was accepted into the training program in Toronto, and then embarked on my clinical training as well as my research training. So I did a PhD in Richard Weisel's lab in the area of cardiac regeneration and cardiac repair. So very translational type of work. And I knew that I wanted to combine both. So I wanted to be a cardiac surgeon, but also a scientist, so surgical scientist. And that's what I ended up doing. I did spend a bit of time in Chicago under Pat McCarthy at Northwestern, learning more about mitral valve repair, heart transplant, mechanical circulatory assist, and then took my job in Western Canada in Calgary, Alberta, where I still am now. And it's been a wonderful ride.
Incredible. So, yeah, just for those of our listeners who don't know, uh, Paul's training was absolutely world class, and as he alluded to, the program in Toronto has a very storied tradition in cardiac surgery and is world famous for its excellence and many of its pioneering approaches and techniques. But that's beyond the scope of today's discussion. But just rest assured, he went through a very, very tremendous and rigorous training program. And I think that might tie into some of the things that he's involved in now. So, Paul, do you want to share with our audience some of the projects that you're interested in now and where your path has taken you?
Yes, absolutely. Um, So maybe I'll just add to that training. So after taking my job, obviously, like many surgeons, you develop your practice, you develop mastery over doing cardiac surgery, which I really enjoyed doing. and developed my research program. And then I started to think, well, what else can I do to make an impact? And that's when many of us go into leadership. So I became the head of the clinical department, which was cardiac surgery, cardiology, critical care, and anesthesia. Over 100 people. COVID hit, so I got thrown in the deep end in leadership. And I also became the director of the Heart Institute. So that's research and fundraising and community engagement and research education, et cetera. So I ran the gamut of leadership and opened my eyes to a lot of things of how the hospital works and the plight, I would say, of many of us in healthcare, particularly at the front lines, and the tensions between the resources and the challenges of delivering healthcare for those who are actually at the point of care. And that certainly shaped my perceptions and my understanding of the whole healthcare experience. And then, of course, to round out my education, I became a patient. I didn't choose that, but like many surgeons, my body started to wear out. So I had this terrible back pain that would come and go, and I think every surgeon can identify with aches and pains. It's just part of the job, and we kind of just shake it off. And we are trained to be stoic, and we're trained not to,
We're tough
we're
guys
trained to
and gals.
exactly,
Right.
exactly, and we're trained to ignore our bodies, right? So when you're doing a long case, right, you don't go to the bathroom, you don't scratch your nose. If you have a headache, who cares? You get the job done. And that's how we approach things. And that was the start of my unraveling because I ignored my pain and I just kept going until I couldn't go anymore. And then one day I was doing an open heart surgery and, the heart was arrested and I was sewing a distal bypass and I couldn't control my right hand anymore. I couldn't hold the instrument. And so that was absolutely terrifying. And fortunately, the on-call surgeon was in the hospital. He came in, completed the case, and that's the last surgery I ever did. So I've done X number of cases, point 0.5, because I never actually finished that case. So
Right.
I'd love to be able to go back and finish. But the long and short of it is, I had found out, I didn't know, I had severe degeneration of my cervical spine, like many of us do as we get
Mm.
older. And I had, so a neurosurgeon had me in the OR 2 weeks later. I had a fusion procedure, but unfortunately, I have damage to my C7 nerve root, and I still have weakness and pain and ongoing issues. I'm much better than I was, but it precludes me from going back to practice. So that was 2 years ago. So I went through a real challenge of trying to figure out, okay, well, if I'm a cardiac surgeon, but I can't do cardiac surgery, then who the hell am I, right? I mean, we very much identify with our identities, and being an active surgeon, meaning like actually doing surgery, is what surgery is all about. So it was a very difficult time for me. And I'm slowly trying to find my way through that in the sense of, maybe I can't do cardiac surgery anymore, but given all of my experiences in training and in healthcare and in leadership and in research and frontline care, maybe there's something I do to change the system or to speak up more. And it certainly has given me an opportunity to try to develop a platform or try to be a thought leader in the space of raising awareness. And particularly, I'm interested in this balance between the excellence that's required in our jobs. And all of us are excellent and we're completely dedicated to that excellence. You have to be a surgeon. But with the cost of the excellence, meaning the sacrifices you make, the toll it takes on your body, how we wear a mask and identify with a strong identity of who we are as these heroic healers and technicians, and how that puts us at risk, really, of, if you are faced with a health issue or you're getting closer to retirement, um, or you are having pressures at home or having troubles with your work-life balance. All of these things start to add up, and we're not in a great position to handle those things. We can handle a lot. I think we talked about resiliency. Surgeons are probably some of the most resilient people I've ever met. But yet we can become derailed pretty quickly if we lose our surgical identity. So these are areas I'm trying to explore now and trying to raise some attention to those issues.
Now, is there something entrepreneurial going on with this at this point? Do you have a business model, or is this still in its fledgling stages?
I think it's still in an exploratory phase. I mean, I think that there could be a business model here as this platform develops. Certainly, I've re-engaged with someone that I trained with, Dr. Geeta Lal, who is doing some incredible work with surgical ergonomics. So she is actually pioneering ways to try to prevent these types of injuries from happening. And there is a massive opportunity for business. I mean, I think she's the tip of the spear and she's leading that space. But there's a lot of interest from industry, and I think there'd be a lot of interest from physicians and healthcare providers and maybe even insurance companies to try and find ways to prevent these types of injuries. And that could mean retooling ORs, the different equipment we use, headlights, loops, mats we stand on, um, the tables we use, etc., to optimize the situation so that we can hopefully last longer. Because 60 to 70% of surgeons, well, cardiac surgeons at least, suffer from musculoskeletal injuries or pain or chronic wear and tear type degeneration. So this is not something new. It's just not something that we talk about. So I think there's a massive opportunity, and maybe there are people listening or watching right now who could get involved in that space, and I would encourage them to do so because I think there is a massive business opportunity here. And of course, the best business opportunities I think come up from where there are gaps, right? And this is a gap that has not been adequately addressed, in my opinion.
Yeah, you raise a point that I think a lot of people are simply not aware of, which is like many professions, there is a very strong element of physical disability as a result of occupational hazard in surgery. I think that many people probably have a misconception about surgery that it's light work. It's
Mhm.
not heavy physical work. But I can remember going back to my medical school days in Newark, New Jersey, at New Jersey Med, and going in the OR, my first rotation with a surgeon who was probably in his late 60s or early 70s, and on about a 1.5 hour routine case, which isn't a very long operation. I remember my back killing me, my feet killing me, my legs killing me, and looking at this quote unquote old man next to me and wondering, how is he standing? And it turned out he was really a very, very strong person from having stood so many hours. And standing in itself takes a lot of energy, a lot of strength. The neck position, as you mentioned, headlights, magnifying loops, the concentration required, where we oftentimes physically lock into one position,
Mhm.
especially when working under loop magnification, where you have a very well defined and predetermined focal length, so you can't move your head back and forth without losing focus. Many of these things. So in my career, I remember when I saw my first interventional cardiologist who stopped doing procedures because she simply couldn't wear the lead anymore. My brother-in-law, who's an interventional cardiologist, who wound up having a couple of back surgeries and unfortunately is still suffering with chronic leg pain, that really sort of brought his career to an early uh, end. And my other brother-in-law's father, who was a dentist, who wound up literally locked in a chin down position, despite having, like yourself, cervical orthopedic slash neurosurgery at NYU, maintained that locked in position, which was really disabling and had a massive impact on his quality of life for many years after that. So I think just what you're doing raises awareness for the general public and our colleagues, and hopefully our younger colleagues who are just coming into practice, that this myth of that we sometimes like to propagate, certainly as surgeons, men and women alike, that we are superheroes, and invincible and not um, subjected to pain, fatigue, emotion, so many of these things that I know that you have been shining light on, which now we realize is a very healthy thing to do. But in our generation, I'm only a few years older than you are, but we're certainly cut from the same piece of cloth in the same generation. We wore our tolerance and almost a pathological appetite for pain, discomfort, fatigue, et cetera, like a badge of honor. And
Yeah, exactly.
it's hard work is something to be proud of, but not to the point where it becomes self-destructive.
Yes, that's a great way to put it. Certainly after my surgery, the first question I asked the surgeon was, of course, when
When
can I
can I go
get
back
back
to
to
work?
work? Right? I mean, it's
Yeah,
first
exactly.
thing we ask. And, he said, I can't remember what it was. He said, 6 to 8 weeks or something like that. And I thought, well, that is a ridiculous amount of time. So, of course, when he said, the benchmark is 8 weeks, I'm like, I'll be back in 3. Right,
Right.
because that's how we think as surgeons. It's the mentality that we have, and certainly, I think we've all heard these heroic stories. Oh, so and so broke his leg, and he, had surgery, and he walked out of one OR and went to the other and did a case. That's the kind
Yeah.
of like these, half of them are probably urban myth,
Right.
but the culture is just attuned to that, and we're trained to think that way. And I think it can be very self-destructive, and very difficult to break away if you have to. And I think that was the part that was really challenging for me, to just be able to say, there is a life outside of doing cardiac surgery. And I think that's a message for anybody who's watching this, who is heavily invested in their career and in their job. And like many of us, to become a surgeon, it's an incredible, I mean, that's how we started the conversation. I mean, it's just like this incredible opportunity, and you have to give everything to that opportunity, and you have to give everything to it to master it and be good at it. And for it to be taken away is really tough to deal with. And we're just not trained to think that way. And also, there's this shame element. I mean, what's universal about surgeons who can no longer do surgery is they feel shame about not being able to do it. And that's how I felt about my neck. I mean, it's not something I did to myself. It was wear and tear from working so hard, but yet I felt ashamed that my body was so weak. I just didn't see myself that way. But,
On the
yet
contrary. Yeah.
here we are, doctors, and we're dealing with these patients. I mean, tons of patients who are younger than I am, who come in with all kinds of issues. And I've had, elite level athletes who needed coronary bypass surgery, because nothing is completely preventative, as we know. So these are the challenges that I think just require a little more discussion. And at the worst, the bad really end of this, John, is that this culture also sets us up for something worse than just feeling bad about not being able to do surgery or losing your identity, but burnout, addiction, and suicide. So these are the things that I'm starting to talk about as well. Is we've all likely had colleagues who were phenomenal surgeons, and when things weren't going their way, they maybe didn't know how to deal with it, and they didn't know how to ask for help. And some end up committing suicide, and it's much more common than we want to admit. And I think it's just time that we talk about these things and not ignore them, right? And not just keep looking through our loops and pretending like all this stuff isn't going on around us, and just doing our jobs, which is our sort of the way, our mentality, right? So that's what I'm trying to do with this platform. Will it turn into a business? It's entirely possible. Um, but it isn't the main part of the mission, right? The mission is about raising the awareness and trying to, at least get the conversation started. And if I can achieve that, I'm going to be very satisfied. If it turns into something that is a business, and people often think of a business as a negative thing. I don't. I think it's, quite frankly, the only way you can scale something, the only way you can effectively implement something, is if you if there's money behind it, right? And if there's people behind it. And all of those resources often require a business-like approach to make them happen. So I'm certainly not against this turning into some kind of business if that's what it takes to make it happen.
Yeah, well, I think you raise a few really great points there. Many, many great points. Going back to something you said a few minutes ago, again, one of the great surgical adages that you're well aware of is, a senior resident, chief resident, or attending might tell you, you know, on call as the call begins late in the afternoon, early in the evening, you can always call me for help, but it's a sign of weakness.
Yes.
So so that attitude, although it was always sort of sardonic humor and tongue in cheek, and we understood it that way. On the other hand, we did everything in our power to handle everything that we could without ever calling for help. And so that's why I think your mission is so powerful and beautiful, because we are amongst a culture of individuals, professionals, who believe that we're supposed to know everything. We're supposed to be able to solve every problem. We're supposed to solve it now. We're supposed to solve it without help. We're supposed to solve it on our own. And we're supposed to solve it without the patient ever having any kind of a problem.
Yeah.
And if any of those things should happen in that process of trying to help somebody else, then we feel inferior, inadequate, embarrassed, humiliated, and exposed, quite frankly, endangered. And I think that that's a pathological situation that has to change. Now, the other thing that you talked about was that you have this terrific idea, and if it turns into a business, terrific, and if it makes money, terrific. And I want to make a few comments about that, because this is something I struggled with for a little while when I first started VitaSupport MD, the dietary supplement company that I started almost 11 years ago now. There was some pushback from colleagues, especially, that somehow this was inherently bad because it was a for-profit supplement company and so forth. And I had to point out to people, again, as much as I'm a surgeon, and as a surgeon you help people, it's also how I make a living. It's how I take care of my family. It's how I pay bills. It's how I put a roof over my head. It's how I afford health care insurance for my family. I mean, because you make some money at something doesn't inherently make it wrong or evil, certainly. And when you sell something like a product, like we do at VitaSport, which are products that are backed in science, tremendous research, and tremendous clinical data, and so forth, again, there's this idea that if you sell something, if you're a salesman, so to speak, that you're doing something to somebody. Where in fact, if you're selling something you believe in, whether it's a triple bypass or dietary supplements or physical assistance to injured surgeons and doctors, or psychological, emotional therapy for doctors and clinicians who are suffering, I don't think you're doing something to them. I think you're doing something for them. And I think that that's a noble goal to have. And for me, one of the most wonderful things about, and I'm still practicing, I'm still, doing surgery every day. I'm filming from my clinic here in New Jersey right now, from the Vein Center. For me, one of the most wonderful things in the last 10 years in building VitaSupport MD is that I can get beyond the limits of my own two hands. It's wonderful to heal somebody or help somebody technically with your hands and your mind and your heart, as we do as surgeons. But when you can help 10,000 people or 100,000 people or 1,000,000 people with a product or a service, then you really feel that you've made a mark that's much bigger than yourself. And I feel like what you're working on is that kind of a project that A, your motivation is in the right place, certainly, based on your own experience and expertise. And then, as a cardiac surgeon who performed many thousands of wonderful, incredible surgeons, because I know about your career and your training and everything else, now to me, this looks like an opportunity for Paul Fedak to go beyond the limits of where his hands can reach and hopefully help people not only in Canada, the United States, North America, but potentially globally.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. I mean, what what I've said because others have told me this is that, I may not be fixing hearts anymore, but I might be healing them. And the instrument is not a scalpel, it's my writing, it's my speaking, it's the thought leadership and the voice. And like you say, that's much more scalable. And I do want to make a point about the business aspect because I think there's this is something that's taboo in medicine, right? And there's certainly a culture around, okay, if you're a clinician, you have to be dedicated to being a clinician and that's it. And people who have sort of a business or something on the side, even doing a podcast or being on social media, I mean, there are some who are skeptical. They're like, oh, that's not professional, or, you're not really committed because you're busy doing this other business. I think that is bull, right? And I really think that what I've come to learn, because I used to think that way. I mean, I was trained to think that way. That was how I was raised in this culture. It's sort of the ivory tower medicine academia culture. And I've certainly learned a lot over the years that that's not valid. That's not the case. And I'm quite frankly, I admire people who are capable of breaking out of that culture and of being their own person. And I think that's partly your story, right? You went your own way. You knew what your values were, and you started a business, and you started a podcast, and you started your own private vein center, and you found your own autonomy, and you're able to do things your own way. And I think that's a great message for so many doctors who are struggling in the system right now, thinking that they're trapped, right? Is that there's no other way. And I think we're naturally autonomous people. We don't want to be told what to do and how to do it. I mean, we have our own working norms and our own values. And if we can't live those values, we start to unravel and it becomes very painful. So I think what you're doing is really great. And I want to add the point of, when I train the doctors who come to learn how to do research in my lab, I really train them also on translational science in that you have to commercialize. I mean, you can dream up all the things you want in your lab, and I see academics doing this all the time, and they go to the meetings and they talk about their incredible research that gets published in these incredible places. But if there's no commercialization plan, that's never touching a patient ever, right? So you can't avoid it. If you actually want to translate your research or your brilliant ideas into patient care, you have to commercialize it. So thinking that commercialization is some sort of evil taboo thing is ivory tower academic thinking that doesn't actually result in real world solutions that are tangible. So I think we have to change that messaging, and I certainly am working on that with my students. And I love collaborating with industry. I mean, I think my industry partnerships and the work that I do with industry is some of the most impactful work I do because it's actually going to change patient care and it's actually going to make a difference. And I've published hundreds of papers and have $1 million of grant funding, but the projects I've done actually in partnership with industry have real world impact. And that's what matters to me. I had a research mentor early in my career, and I said, you work on all these things. Like, how do you know that your research matters? And he said, well, research excellence is when you change patient care, not just your patients, but everyone else's patients too. So when other doctors are adopting the thing that you've invented or produced through your research, the findings, then you've had major impact. And I think that's true for us in the business world, that if you want to have major impact, you want to scale, you're going to have to commercialize and be a business. And my last point on this is that it also has a psychological effect. If you give somebody something for free, they won't value it. And in fact, you could give someone the secret of the world for free. They're not going to listen to you. But if you ask them to pay for it, just something, it doesn't have to be millions of dollars. But the point of that transaction, it makes them appreciate what that thing is, right? And makes them more likely to benefit from it. So I think this is an important discussion. And quite frankly, I don't know a lot of doctors having this type of discussion. So you may be breaking some new ground with your podcast by even exploring this issue.
Oh, thank you. Um, yeah, everything you're saying obviously resonates with me very powerfully. I gave a talk recently at the International Vein Congress, Jose Almeida's meeting down in Miami. Jose was just a guest on our program a few days ago for the entrepreneurial work he's done. And it was a very fascinating discussion because he's been an incredibly successful individual. But one of the first things that he admitted to when it came to his entrepreneurial endeavors is they don't all work out, and that's okay too. I mean, again, as surgeons, we don't like to talk frequently about cases that didn't work out or things didn't go well or there were complications or a poor outcome. But any surgeon worth his salt or her salt or, their credentials, if they've done enough surgery, they're going to have some things that are suboptimal, let's put it that way. And Jose was very forthcoming about a few projects in entrepreneurship where he had some poor results. Things didn't work out. It didn't take off. But that's not a reason not to try. And that doesn't mean that his efforts weren't valuable. And he's had others that have been very, very successful. So I think as physicians and surgeons, we have a lot of great attributes. And that was what I spoke about at the IVC, was that we're hard workers, we're bright, we're determined, we're smart, we're educated, we're willing to study, we're willing to learn new things, we're willing to go the extra mile. And those are all positives, but one of the downfalls for most of us is that we're not comfortable when there's not a really well-defined path. If you want to become a cardiac surgeon, getting into that program may be very, very difficult, highly competitive. But if you can find your way in, you can get your foot in the door. Somebody will tell you every morning at 5:30 or 6 a.m. where to go, what to do, pull this chest tube, write that note, go grab the bandages, whatever it is. And they will bring you step by step through that process of training. And in the back of your mind, you always know, well, if I could just put up with this, if I could just make it through another day, if I could just make it through another year, if I could just, do what I'm told and be strong and be tough and stick with it, I'm guaranteed to get a piece of paper at the end. I'm guaranteed to get a certificate, to get a diploma, and to be able to go out and take care of people and make a living. Entrepreneurship, on the other hand, I should say, no matter how hard you're willing to work and study and read and try and apply yourself, there's no set path, there's no certified training program, and there's no guarantee that you're going to come out the other end successful and, as we said, being able to make a living, put a roof over your head, etc. And I think that for surgeons, especially and cardiac surgeons like ourselves, we're definitely control freaks. We love to be in complete control of a situation. Vascular surgeons like proximal and distal control and, no bleeding and loops around everything and so forth. And I understand that. So entrepreneurship for medical professionals, clinicians, doctors, surgeons, I think that's one of the great hurdles we have to overcome, is the not knowing that it's going to work out if I work really, really hard over a long period of time. And we don't know how long the program is. If I tell you I'm going to put you in a 6-year cardiac surgical program or a 7-year cardiac surgical program, at least you can prepare yourself mentally. But I can tell you with VitaSupport MD, that's almost 11 years old now, it was 8.5 years before my partners and I ever took any kind of distribution. And everything that the company made in those 8.5 years had to pour back into the company to grow it, to develop it, to advertise it, to market it, to hire people, to, et cetera. But we were in a position we could do that because we had day jobs, so to speak.
Yeah.
But not everybody can hang in there for the long haul like that, not knowing when will it work, when to quit, how long to keep going. So I think those are fascinating aspects.
Yeah. Yeah, those are great points. I mean, God, there's so many things I'd like to touch on with that. One is courage. I mean, if you were to go out in society and say, well, who has courage, right? I mean, they're going to say surgeons, right? They're the courageous ones of the medical specialty, right? They know no boundaries, like enter any frontier. That's how we picture it. And yes, surgeons are very courageous in some ways, but not in the way that you are describing, right? That taking that long-term gamble. I mean, surgeons love the immediacy of the moment. That's what we love about surgery. Like we get right in there, we fix something, you see it's fixed, and you feel good. Everybody claps and you go and you do it
Call for
again.
call for the next one.
Right? Next case, right? Uh, and it feels great.
Yeah.
And I mean, we love that, but it's a very compressed window in this moment versus this very sort of empty page, more creative, unstructured pathway of entrepreneurship,
Yeah, it's a
which you
blank
describe.
canvas for sure.
It absolutely is. And I think this is why surgeons sometimes become really challenged when they get into leadership. It's not entrepreneurship, but it's the same thing. And there's no immediacy of the moment. You're building a program that may take years. Some things work, some things don't work, and you've got to be able to own that. And I mean, at least I love the sort of old dogma for, entrepreneurship is if you're going to fail, fail fast. Like, don't burn up too much money just to find out you're going to fail. If you better to fail in 1 year than 10 years. And so it's a totally different mindset, right? Like we don't talk about failure. We don't think about failure. Like failure is not an option, right? We go in there and we're going to rescue the situation. Versus entrepreneurship, it's sort of like, well, failure is very likely, right? And that's not something we're used to. And especially in cardiac surgery too. I mean, let's face it, 99% of our patients do extremely well. If it was 50%, I don't think I could do cardiac surgery. I wouldn't have pursued it. And maybe that's why I went into cardiac surgery, because it's largely a success story,
Yeah,
right? I
maybe if it
mean,
were 50%, Paul, anybody could do cardiac surgery, right? I mean, if
yeah.
that was the expectation, and
Well, there
and
was
it, you know,
There was a day when it was that. I mean, when it first started, right?
yeah,
Those were the Mavericks. Like they were losing most of their patients. Like, for the dawn of cardiac surgery, when you look at historically, I mean, they lost patient after patient until many of them actually gave up and stopped doing it because they weren't sure if it was ever going to work. So for sure, it's a totally different mindset, but I think it's a good way to, I think it's maybe good for surgeons to do something like that, to balance out this, to learn and maybe they'll learn how to deal with their own failures by getting used to it in entrepreneurship. But it sounds like yours has been quite successful. So, you didn't have the failure experience that many do in entrepreneurship.
well, again, I think that part of it is um, if we had been in a different circumstance, in other words, if we had quit our jobs to create the supplement company, we
Right.
would have had to quit somewhere along the line. There wasn't enough profit to live off of, but there was enough profit to put back into the company so we didn't have to keep reinvesting. But we were making a living doing other things. My partners are in commercial industrial real estate. They're not in medicine at all, but we all put in a relatively small investment 11 years ago, and then we ran the whole company out of the till. So, and we had the desire and the ambition and the drive to keep going. But if we had to depend on that alone, we would have had to shut it down somewhere along the line. And I think for our listeners about entrepreneurship in general, a couple of the statistics that people don't know. Some people know the first one, but not too many know the second statistic. The first statistic is that roughly 85% of all new businesses in the United States, I'll say North America, go out of business in the first 3 years. They don't make it past 3 years. So people say to them, well, that's great. If I'm one of those 15%, I mean, that's not great, but at least it's 15%. I believe in myself and I believe in my team and I believe in my idea. If I could be one of those 15%, then I'll be okay. What they don't know is statistic number two, which is of the remaining 15%, 85% of those businesses, no matter how long they stay in business, never turn a profit. So you're talking about only 15% of 15% of businesses, which is, something, whatever it is, 3%, 2.5% or something, 2.25% of all businesses that are new startups ever actually become profitable. So those, again, like you said, if those were your chances in cardiac surgery, you wouldn't be taking the patient to the operating room. You'd be saying nitroglycerin, aspirin, and a beta blocker for, as long as they can hold out on that. But so it takes, again, I think it takes a special kind of personality. And I think we as doctors and physicians, we do have the work ethic and the stamina and the smarts, and in many cases the imagination and the ideas and so forth, to do something that would help a lot of people inside of healthcare. But the big black box, the thing that really gets in the way of so many people, unfortunately, is this insecurity and lack of assurance that it's going to work if you would just hang in there. So, whether you become a cardiac surgeon, neurosurgeon, whatever it is, these things that take many, many years, people are willing to do the years, even extra lab years or a PhD and a master's degree and whatever is required, as long as they see hard evidence that that brass ring is at the end of the journey. Whereas in entrepreneurship, one of the really debilitating things for people who want to get involved is that there is no such guarantee at the end. Not to say that every person who starts on the journey of becoming a cardiac surgeon or neurosurgeon makes it, but that's kind of on them. But there's no question that there is a defined program with a defined number of years and certain steps that have been delineated and are accepted. And if you can do it, you'll be rewarded. But entrepreneurship, again, doesn't have that kind of a set pattern or guarantee.
But if you look at so all great points. If you look at the life cycle of the entrepreneur, if they do stick with it, and if they are persistent and they're disciplined, they learn from each one that they do. And oftentimes, a successful entrepreneur will tell you that they failed 10 times until they finally found one business that worked and they returned all of their investment and more. So there are, I think despite those numbers, um, those numbers don't show the repeated, the persistence and the what you carried with you from doing it a couple of times that failed that then turned into success. And I don't think it's random. I think people are learning, they're building their networks, they're honing their skills the same way we do. Like, every case we do, yeah, 99% survive, but survival is not just success, right? I mean, you can look at a case and say, well, could I have done it faster? Could I have done it more efficiently? Could I have stitched it in a better way? Could I have made that repair a little more durable? So there's all these nuances, and we learn from each one of those. So every good surgeon is learning from every case they do, and they're critically evaluating every case. So I think that part of the story is really an important one. Uh, And also, I would say that it's not just the destination. I mean, I think like you gotta love the journey. It's cliche, but if you're not loving what you're doing, and I think a lot of entrepreneurs, they love what they're doing because they do have the autonomy and they are chasing a passion and they're building teams and they're doing it their way and they're meeting interesting people and they're flying all around and they're meeting with investors. And I work with a startup as the chief medical officer, so I know this world. and it's very exciting, right? It's an exciting place to be. I love those meetings. I don't love the meetings in healthcare where I'm sitting around with administrators. It's a very different vibe, right? You're smiling because you know exactly what I'm talking about. So it's like, what floats your boat? What gives you energy? And I think the people that are in that entrepreneurship space are are chasing their passion. They're full of energy. They're loving what they're doing. It's hard and it's risky, there's no question, but they're learning and they're honing their skills. And if they're persistent, many of them end up being successful at some point.
Yeah, I think you make some great points, and I think as an entrepreneur, there's very little other reason to put yourself in that position other than the fact that you love your idea, you love
Yeah.
your product, you love your service, because otherwise you just go get a job and work for somebody and get a steady
Yeah.
paycheck and so on and so forth, which most entrepreneurs could if they wanted to. You reminded me of a couple of great quotes or anecdotes. How true they are, I don't know, but they talk about, of course, the classic is with Thomas Edison, quote unquote, inventing the light bulb. I think he really perfected the light bulb or improved it dramatically, made it commercially, as you pointed out, commercially viable as a light source. And he tried all of these different filaments, dozens and then hundreds, and some people say maybe more than 1,000 filaments that didn't work. They either didn't conduct electricity and glow, or they just burnt up too fast or whatever. And finally, he came up with, I guess it's, I don't know what it is, some kind of impregnated, carbon impregnated metallic filament. I'm not an engineer, I should probably know that, but he found something that worked. And people said to him, or somebody asked him, how did you keep going when you had failed so many times in finding a filament? And he said, well, I didn't look at it that way. I considered, I considered as I had proven 1,000 ways that didn't work. So if somebody were going to come behind me, at least I had this body of knowledge that I could hand them and say, listen, don't waste your time on whatever it is, elephant tusk or whatever, because it's not going to work. I've already tried it. So he kind of looked at those failures in a positive way. And then there's another great story. This one I know to be true because I saw it on TV when I was much younger. I was an adolescent, and Ted Turner, who started CNN, was on the news being interviewed. And there were many things that he was involved in that were disastrous. When he first started to win the America's Cup sailing race, they sank a couple of boats. They were almost killed. I think he bought the Texas Rangers, which was in last place for a long time. CNN almost went bankrupt and so forth. And there was a point in his career that he was losing $1 million a day, which at the time was considered a lot of money. Today the numbers are so astronomical, who knows? But he was losing $1 million a day for 2 years. And the guy interviewing him said, how did you put up with all of that losing? And he became indignant almost because his personality. And he said, I wasn't losing, I was learning how to win.
Yeah.
And so it's just as you said in the early days of cardiac surgery. And if anybody out there is interested in that subject, there's a great book. I'm almost certain the name is A Band of Brothers, about the early days of cardiac surgery in Minnesota and so forth. And as Dr. Fedak pointed out, there were a lot of deaths. Now, many of those deaths, fortunately, if there's any bright side, occurred in people who would have died anyway without surgery because of various diseases that people had at that time. This is long before coronary bypass disease. It was mostly valvular disease, mitral valvular disease, rheumatic fever, and things like that. And then many congenital problems in babies who were born blue and didn't have long to live and so forth. So that gave them the courage and the drive to say, well, these people are not going to live very long anyhow, it seems, so let's give them a chance. And they did learn how to win, and they did improve the techniques and improve the instrumentation and improve the suture and eventually, of course, developed the cardiopulmonary bypass machine, which was a huge advance in cardiac surgery. But I mean, they did things back then that today we would see as insane, like maternal fetal bypass. Hooking
Hmm.
up the mother to the infant as a heart lung machine and things are, and they didn't know anything about blood RH factor and blood
The
typing and
only operation that can carry with it a 200% mortality, they would say.
exactly, exactly. I mean,
That's right.
but they kept going, and I think the point of our show is certainly not to discourage anybody, but on the contrary, to encourage our colleagues in healthcare, whether they're doctors or nurses or technologists or therapists or whomever, to take your ideas and believe in your ideas and develop them and run with them. And it's not a terrible thing like we did in our case at VitaSupport MD to keep a safety net. That's why there's an old adage: don't quit your day job. There are a lot of
Hmm.
things you can do after hours on weekends and holidays without kind of blowing up your life, so that you can take care of yourself and a family if you have one, and make sure that you've got a roof over your head and health insurance, and that you're safe and sound in so many ways. But then you have to be that individual who's willing to work after hours, weekends, nights, and so forth. So it's a balance, but I love it. The entrepreneurial aspect of my life, I think I see it as a great creative outlet. I get to meet great people like Paul Fedak and have amazing conversations like this, which otherwise I would not. So I think it's something for all of us to consider if you have a passion, a desire, or a drive. Paul, as we come near the end of our time here, one of the questions I like to ask people, these last two questions, is if there was anybody dead or alive that you could have dinner with and pick their brain and sit down and have a conversation, who would that be?
Oh, that's a tough one. There's one person who this person is actually still alive. But somebody that I really admire, I actually forget his name, but he started a school of medicine in New York, the Langone School, and there's a great book about him. It's called World Class, and it's all about how he came in and integrated the academia and the clinical side. He's not exactly a businessman, but he's the CEO and president and dean of that organization. And the book was just incredible, talking about his strategy and his approach to sort of management and building up this organization and taking it through some difficult moments. So it's an incredible book about leadership. This is somebody that I would love to sit down with and pick their brain and understand better about their approaches and how their career developed and what motivated them. So that would be one for sure. But there are certainly many sort of artists. Like, I love music, so for me to like be able to sit down and have dinner with some of the greatest musicians and artists would be fantastic. Ernest Hemingway. I mean, I love like Jimi Hendrix. I mean, um, anybody from these legendary sort of like rock gods would be people that I would love to kind of meet and understand and hear their stories. I mean, artists in particular, in my mind, are kind of like entrepreneurs in a way, and they are some of the bravest and most courageous people. And they don't have, they're really taking a gamble about on their passions, and that's just something that I really admire. So anybody in that category would certainly be on my list. But the old saying is, right, you never want to actually meet your heroes, right? So it's almost better to carry with you
The myth, the legend.
yeah, the myth and the legend and what you get from it, rather than if you meet somebody, and they've got some like mustard on their cheek the whole
Right.
time you're talking to them, you're kind of like, it's like ruining all of it. So maybe it's better that we don't have that opportunity.
Yeah. A point well made and well taken. I think you point out something really interesting there about artists being some of the most courageous people. Um, when you look at the history of the world and even contemporary times, things that are happening around the world now, and you see what some of the artists are doing and taking a stand, they often really put themselves at great risk and put themselves out there. So I think that's a beautiful and very very interesting perspective that you brought to that. I don't think people always look at artists in that light. I think they often get dismissed as being um, sort of superficial and not important and not cerebral and not intellectual. But I think that's a really terrific point you brought out there.
Well, they may not be cerebral, and that's the problem is that we all, most of us in the professions, law, medicine, accounting, management consulting, CEOs, that is a job about the frontal cortex, right? It's all about analysis and calculation and strategy. But that's just your mind. But your heart, right? We're heart surgeons. Talk about our heart, not the anatomical heart, but the world of feelings and emotions and connection and compassion. That's actually what makes you human, right? Soon enough, AI is going to replace our frontal cortex. So we better engage with our hearts and those other aspects and different ways of knowing. There's a noetic knowing, which is an instinctual knowing that doesn't come through your mind, right? And I don't want to get too spiritual for your business podcast,
No,
but
it's okay. We go everywhere. We go
okay.
everywhere.
But those are things that I've come to think are really important. And that's the world of the artist. That's the world of the painter and the sculptor and the writer and the poet and the musician, right? That's their world. That's what they're communicating to us. And those are important truths that we have to start to appreciate and understand because the world of the mind and the cerebral cortex and calculating and striving and competing and strategizing, that's not the road to joy, right? That's not the road to peace. Those are still important tools. That's how we do incredible medicine and keep people alive, right? With our technology, but it doesn't heal them, right? So we fix people, but we don't always heal them. And healthcare needs to evolve to the point where maybe we're even bringing in artists. We're allowing poetry. We're allowing music. We're allowing people to feel something. And I think that's what our patients want. That's what they're missing in healthcare. And I think as providers, that's what we want too. I mean, I think that's what inspired many of us to go into medicine. And somewhere along the way, we lose it. And that's really what my platform is all about, is just trying to get people to recognize that and understand that piece and maybe feel a little bit more because I think we get numb to it over all the years. But that is the world of the artist. And I do think that they are the most courageous people, much more courageous than art surgeon.
Amazing. Um, we are sentient beings, and I think that uh, separates us from a lot of the little animals in the world. I mean, maybe there are some others, the higher mammals and things, dogs and so forth, who feel in a similar way
Hmm.
that we do. But I think that's a very, very important point that you bring out. My last question would be, as this sort of project is taking shape for you, and I see some of the work that you're doing on LinkedIn, I guess it's an open-ended question for you. If there's anybody out there listening who might be interested in your services, whether it's a speaking engagement or might be interested in learning more about your project and what direction they want to take it, somebody who might be interested from an investment point of view, how could people get in touch with you and take your time with that on each of those subjects I brought up, if there's any possibilities there from Dr. Paul Fedak's point of view?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're developing a service offering to go along with all of this, but there's a film in the works, so that will be educational that I'm hoping can be played for medical students all the way to people in their career to bring some of these issues forward. I'm writing a book, so if there's any book publishers out there that want to sign me up, count me in. I think a book is a great way to get some of this across. And then I'm hoping to build a platform where there could be more speaking engagements to come into organizations like hospitals, academic centers, etc., and just hold some space for this type of conversation, right? I mean, it's not that I have answers, but to allow people to talk about this, and I'm using storytelling through my own storytelling and my own anecdotal encounters with patients or my journey to try to inspire that type of conversation. And so if there are venues where people would like to hold space for those types of conversations, I'd be more than happy to participate. I have been asked to do some coaching for some healthcare organizations and some strategy for healthcare organizations who are having troubles with team dynamics or people are burning out, losing their way, sort of thing, not loving coming to work anymore. The environment is starting to, the culture is eroding. Sometimes bringing in somebody like me just to hold space and have conversations and can change the trajectory. So if you are in charge of that type of organization or you're seeing these problems and you're not seeing a way forward, feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me directly by email, paul.fedak@gmail.com, or ping me on LinkedIn, connect with me and message me, and we can talk about next steps.
Great. Paul.fedak, Fedak, @gmail.com. And I think that that would be an outstanding opportunity for any organization to have you come and speak, or individuals looking for coaching. And I should also mention, which I did not mention in the early part, but you can go to Paul's LinkedIn page and check out his background and so forth. Not that this is essential, but it may be important to some people. I noticed, Paul, you did some advanced training in leadership in the Harvard system, if I'm not mistaken.
I did, yeah. It was the first year of a program. It's a year-long program, and it's actually directed for surgical leadership. It's a great program, and I've suggested it to many other colleagues, and many have attended. You meet surgeons from all around the world who are engaged in leadership. So you develop this great network, and you learn a lot of really important skills. I've found it really beneficial. So I think leadership training, formal leadership training is critical. I mean, you wouldn't pick up a scalpel without doing a residency program. And I think similarly as a surgeon, yeah, you have innate leadership skills, but leadership outside the OR is a bit different. And we think we're leaders, but we're pace-setting leaders. We're in charge, right? And that's not how all leadership works, especially in the modern world, right? It's much more collaborative, servant leadership, etc. So and situational leadership. So I think those are skills that we can learn as surgeons, but getting some formal training can be extremely helpful in that regard. So yeah, I'm trained in that. I took extra courses in negotiation and conflict resolution, because those are also two areas that I think are critical for any leader and also critical in business. I mean, I think for your entrepreneur minded audience, taking negotiation courses is absolutely critical, right? Everything is a negotiation at the end of the day. Whether it's your business or your marriage, everything's a negotiation. And those skills are vital. And then conflict resolution, anytime people are involved, there's conflict. Most of the stress of leadership, most of the thing that takes all your energy is the interpersonal conflicts. And we're not all good at resolving those. And I think surgeons in particular don't necessarily have the skill set from their training and how to manage interpersonal conflicts. So those are two areas I think I would highly recommend for everybody to pursue. And it doesn't have to be a year-long course, right? These are shorter courses, but super valuable.
Beautiful. Well, Paul, thank you so much for being on today's show. As I told you in the beginning, we're just going to go where it takes us, and I think it's been really, really fascinating. One more time for our viewers and listeners, paul.fedak, Fedak, @gmail.com, if you want to get in touch with this extraordinary human being and wise, brilliant, talented, and sentient man. Don't hesitate to reach out, and I wish you all lots of luck in finding paths together. that's going to bring fruit and happiness and joy to your life. So with that, it's a wrap for this episode of The Business of Better with Dr. John Chuback. Thank you.
Thank you, John.